Welcome, everybody, to From the Trenches, Success Shortcuts Revealed by Real-World Innovators Crushing It Right Now. I'm your host, Scott Hartley, and we're back with another episode packed with actionable strategies from today's most successful entrepreneurs. If you're tired of generic business advice and ready for real, cutting-edge tactics that are working right now, you're in the right place. Today, we're diving deep into how to avoid building your website backwards. How to avoid building your website backwards. Isn't that intriguing? Well, I can't wait to share with you the transformational insights from our guest. So let me introduce you to Evan Cox. For more than 15 years, Evan has served businesses, nonprofits, churches, and the leaders who guide them. Whether serving on staff at internationally renowned nonprofits or running a coffee company in Southeast Asia that helped local farmers develop sustainable agriculture and business practices, Evan's work has taken him around the globe. Today, he has the privilege of working with small businesses, nonprofits, and churches across multiple continents as a StoryBrand certified guide so that they can communicate the right message and then infuse it throughout all of their marketing, from strategy and copy to websites and fundraising. Evan, I'm delighted to have you here today.
Thanks, Scott. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, whenever you had agreed to be a guest on the podcast and was kind of giving me some ideas of what we could talk about, the one that really stuck out to me the most intriguing, is how to avoid building your website backwards. I didn't even know that that was a thing that you could do, right? So I'm really interested to hear what you mean by that.
Well, I think you teed it up perfectly because you're right. It's not intentional. And in fact, nobody sets out to build anything backwards. Think about your home, or Christmas time comes and it's the toys for your kids. You never intentionally build something backwards because then it ends up not the way you intended it to.
Yep.
But if anybody remembers that meme or GIF that cycled social media for the past couple of years, it's like when you get all of the input and don't follow a strategy, here's the wall you build, and it's like the bricks, and it's all like that's what it's almost like. It's almost like that's the visual of building something backwards, where you're like, ooh, I should do this. And then our website probably should do this. And when you get to the end result, by the time that you've crammed all the stuff in there, it's accidentally built in a way that's not going to serve you well. So there's 3 different ways that we love to see those intentional steps create an optimized, effective website. But accidentally getting them backwards is a lot easier than people even realize.
Okay. Well, I would love to learn about what those 3 steps are, and then, of course, the right way to actually do that, because I'm contemplating on kind of redoing my website because I've been pivoting in my business. And so getting this down and understanding it will probably save me a lot of headache and heartache in the future.
Yeah, and I've done it backwards. Like, the only reason I know that it is a thing is because I've done it. Like, early in my career, I'm like, "Ooh, we should definitely do this. And what if we added this?" And it's, especially if you're a small business owner who has tons of ideas, and most entrepreneurs fit into that bucket.
Yep.
It's easy to accidentally create too many things. So here's the 3 simple steps, and then we can dive in.
Okay.
When you build a website, what you need to make sure you start with is strategy. Number 1, we want to make sure that our website is, first of all, building the right thing, and then we want to build it right. So that means if you're an e-commerce business, you're playing a different game than if you're a nonprofit. The style of business that you have, the business model that you espouse, all of those factors are meaning that you're going to need something different out of your website. We're no longer in the late 90s, early 2000s, where people are debating if they need a website or not for their business.
Right.
That's not where we're at. But what people don't realize is that you do have to go a step beyond, I need a website. We need to decide, what do we want our website to do for us? What does a slam dunk win look like if our website's actually operating correctly? If you don't have products to sell, you don't need an e-commerce website, right? Like, so Shopify in that case is probably overkill and not the direction you want to go, just because it doesn't fit your business model.
Sure.
Step 2 is you need a clear message and the right content or words. And here's where it's easy to get tripped up. there's so many website templates. In fact, in today's world, it's even easier than before to say, I love the look and feel of that template. That's got a cool video. I love this like dynamic motion graphic thing. And all of that can be really effective. I love a beautifully designed website.
Yeah.
But if you take that approach and do it first, and then try to cram in the words afterwards,
Hmm.
it's doing it backwards. So step three is actually making sure I have the right message. And then we write actual words that solve a problem and showcase what you do for your audience. And then step three is deciding, okay, now let's do design. Let's make sure that our design is beautiful and optimized and efficient and a good UI or user experience. But let's wrap that design around the words. Like, let's make sure that the
Mm.
words and design go hand in hand together. Because I've seen too many clients where we've had to fix their old site because what happened, they worked with their cousin, their uncle, or some designer out there who had good intentions,
Yep.
but created a template and then just literally threw it over the wall and said, okay, what words do you want to say? And they just like plug it in. And so that's building it backwards, is starting with design and then cramming words in and launching.
Yeah.
That's not effective for anybody.
Right. And if we really take a moment to think about it, in our own experience, we don't buy something from a website based upon the design. It's ultimately, the words, what's the offer basically that
Mm-hmm.
convinces us that, or persuades us, it's like, you need this. Now, the design obviously can help in making that, persuasion. But if you ask most people, they're not going to say, oh yeah, the color scheme on that website just, forced me to click that buy now button or request that lead magnet, right?
That's right. And
Yeah.
some websites don't even have that button, or they miss some like pivotal points because if you don't think about the words and like what you want people to do next, it's easy to be like, hey, we got the good photos in there. And then that button that kind of acts like a cash register or a phone call is gonna like, oh, I left that out. I actually reviewed a website last week and they missed a call to action on their homepage.
Oh
There
my
was
goodness.
one clear like there was something at the bottom, like a contact us. There was but I'm like, oh, that's a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
Huge opportunity.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of briefly touch upon, each of these three points here. So what
Yeah.
exactly do you mean by strategy, and what are some things that our listeners should really think about when they're contemplating the strategy if they're going to be launching a brand new website or maybe revising an existing one?
Yeah. So strategy is one of those nebulous words that everybody's like, oh, that's great. That's in a book, or I should know that. But strategy is hard to define sometimes. And
Hmm.
so I actually set out on a journey a couple of years ago to define that for myself, to figure out what is it that I believe about strategy and defining, and boiling it down to simply knowing what to do. That's strategy. I have
Okay.
a plan, I have a destination, I know what to do. It doesn't have to be overcomplicated. I do create strategic plans that have more depth than that.
Hmm.
But the reality is, if you can start with, I want my website to do this, that points you in the right direction. I
Yeah.
want my website to help people book a call. I want my website to not only help them book a call, but maybe also download a resource that builds my email list, which is entering territory that you know about. Like,
Hmm.
okay, that would be helpful. Or e-commerce. I want people to actually buy something from my website without having to talk to me and then
Yeah.
have access to customer service. Okay, that is a drastically different approach. We
Sure.
need to start with that and then knowing who our audience is.
Hmm.
If you don't know who your audience is, it's going to be really hard to write words that compel them to take action.
Yeah.
And we know that, like if you're a plumber, you know that you are either probably going to do residential or commercial. But if
Hmm.
you don't actually like put pen to paper and think about that or have it documented, it can be really easy just to like start talking about plumbing because it's your world
Yeah.
and not actually think, well, does this actually feel like residential plumbing or am I not being specific enough?
Yeah. And, you touched on this, is that, with your website, thinking about what you want to get from it. What do you
Yeah.
want the visitor to actually do? Because we don't want to just have a billboard on the World Wide Web. we actually want people to do something when they get to our website. And like you said, it might be book a call, it might be buy something, it might be download a resource, or whatever that might be. But if we've got, and it's so simplistic, we just need to think about what's the number one thing that we want people to do. And you mentioned the plumber, and I'd have to give some thought to this because I'm not a plumber, but if I'm in residential plumbing, what is the action that I want them to take? Some plumbers might say, well, I want them to click the button to call me. But if you're a single man shop, maybe that's not the right action because you're not going to be able to take those calls. Maybe there's some other action that you want those visitors to take. So I love that you're drilling down on the strategy there, that it's like, what's that thing that you want people to do when they land on your site?
And I have done this over 230 times now. I've kind of kept track of all the different clients we served.
Uh-huh.
And I distilled all of the questions that I ask down to 11 questions that I always ask from a
Hmm.
strategy perspective to get things in a good spot to be able to write the words.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things you could ask and talk about and address, but the reality is it doesn't have to be complicated. 10 or 11 questions might just be what you need in 15 minutes to
Yeah.
start documenting the strategy and knowing what to do.
That's awesome. So once we've got our strategy, once we've figured out what we want our visitors to do, now the next and probably the most difficult part for most of us is figuring out what is the message that we need to put onto that website. What's that content that's
Mhm.
actually going to compel the visitor to do the action that we want?
Yeah, and in that step two, there's a part A and a part B. And it's
Okay.
really easy to get those two things mixed up or feel like it's one and the same, but it's not.
Okay.
Having a clear message and having the right words is almost like having ingredients and having a recipe. I love to grill. I love to barbecue. My boys love doing that with me. And I love that metaphor or imagery because the reality is if you have the message right, that is the ingredient. There's lots of different ingredients you can create lots of recipes with. Salt
Hmm.
is used in a lot of dishes, but
Sure.
your message is knowing, okay, this is the problem that I solve for this particular audience. Or there are multiple problems. Let's at least list them out, and that way we can know to address each of them. Or my audience might want three things, but this is the most important thing that they want.
Hmm.
We use the story brand framework, which you're very familiar with,
Yep.
to actually document that with a proven 7-step process.
Hmm.
But just because you have your message in place doesn't automatically mean that those are the words that go in the header of your website. They
Okay.
could
Hmm.
possibly be there, but it's almost like those words or what we call in the marketing space copywriting,
Yep.
the output of those ingredients, because there's lots of different recipes that you can create with lots of ingredients.
Yep.
And salt is used in baking and it's used in steak and everything in between.
Hmm.
So knowing how to properly translate a problem or a solution from your message into words that should live in a header or a subheader or somewhere on your site, or
Hmm.
eventually in the emails that you'd write or the lead generator that you create.
Yeah.
All of that helps make sure that you translate message to actual words and writing that's going to convince somebody to take action.
So that's kind of the distinction between message and content. So you've got the
Yeah.
message, which is, here's kind of the core problem, and the solution maybe that we offer. And then the content is what we actually put on the website.
Absolutely. And what I love is that when you work on your message and your copy or your content for your website, it's not like a once and done and oh, that was a good exercise, but I can't use it anymore.
Hmm.
Once you have those two things established, then you start using it for email subject lines and email content that you drop in Keep or your other platform. And
Hmm.
obviously, that's when you get involved and make sure that it actually hits the inbox and all those pieces,
Yep.
but you can repurpose on social media and all these platforms. So don't write once and then say, well, that's done. Keep
Yeah.
going back to it and use it time and time again for everything that you end up creating.
Yeah. And, I've touched upon that, so many times in conversations with clients throughout the years is, you really want to repurpose as much as you can. Number one, because it makes it easier on you. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. But secondly, and maybe most importantly, is that you now have consistency with your audience because they're seeing the same message over and over again in multiple places, multiple ways, and they come to know you as the solution for whatever it is that they're trying to solve there.
Yeah, and a couple of years ago, I was working with a client in the roofing space, and they said, "Wait a minute, we're reviewing our website, our lead generator, and our email sequence all at one time. We're on
Mm-hmm.
a call," and they're like, "But you already used that statement, and you already had this here." And the reality was, in one sitting, they were looking at all the different
Everything.
places,
Yeah.
and they were a little worried that it felt redundant. And I said, "Well, people don't consume content that way. They're going to see this." But then they're going to come back to it because you're retargeting an ad, and then they'll download the thing, and then they won't open your first couple emails, but they'll open the third. I
Yep.
said you don't want it to be repetitive and redundant, but you want to have a central thread, and
Mm-hmm.
repurposing your content is one of the best ways to do that. Or like if you've written a book, which I know that you've done, like if you use that again to
Yeah.
then like fuel all the other stuff, like find ways to end up using it for everything you create. So that's
Yeah.
step.
Yeah, we get tired of our own stuff faster than our prospects and our clients will because we're so
Uh-huh.
engrossed in it every single day. So we've got the strategy. So we're going to figure out like what's the main purpose for our website? What do we want people to do? Then we're going to
Yep.
craft the content that's based upon the messaging. So what are the words that are going to be on there? Now we get to go to the fun stuff that most people go to first, right?
Mhm.
Because it's the exciting piece of building a website is the design. But I know that design, as you mentioned before, it's got to complement the message. Talk about that for just a little bit.
Yeah, so if we're going to use a different metaphor, also food related, because I just had lunch and again, I love to barbecue. If you have the right words and the right message, it's like having a porterhouse steak, but if the design is not right,
Mm-hmm.
it's serving it up on a garbage can lid,
Mm.
right? It's like, oh, we've got the right thing, but it's not super appealing. The other problem is if you've got ramen noodles, and I'm not going to hand ramen noodles because that was like my junior high lunch, right? That is what you're promising as a porterhouse steak, and it's served up on a beautiful set of like silver platter.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's again going to be a mismatch because people are expecting the sizzle of the fajitas, and what do they get? Ramen noodle. Like it's got to be both and not either or. The
Yeah,
design has to complement the words, and it has to be effective and fast and mobile optimized. So we still want all those things.
sure.
Here's where I find people get hung up. You want to know the one thing that seems to trip people up the most? Because it happened last week.
What's that?
People wonder, well, does that mean that everything has to be custom coded design? Can I not use a template anymore? And
Mm.
people really get hung up on that because sometimes maybe the template's all you can afford, or you find one that you feel like complements your ability to write something if you're DIYing it.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is, yes, I would love in a perfect world that everything is custom designed around the word so it's unique to your brand.
Yep.
If you feel like for affordability reasons or speed or efficiency, you have to go with a template, make sure that that template checks some design best practices, but then know before you start coding or building anything, hey, this template allows this many characters and words before it starts to look funky.
Mm.
I'm going to write a headline with my message that's no more than 60 characters. Okay, like know what your constraints are, and
Mm-hmm.
then you're going to have to get really creative to make sure that the message is clear, compelling, but also fits the space.
Yeah.
It makes it a little bit more constrictive, but it's not impossible.
Sure. Yeah, and that's why it's important to find a web designer who understands the importance of how the design and the message go together as
That's right.
opposed to two totally separate things.
Yeah, because your first experience, as much as we would like to think like, oh, they're gonna no, the first experience is what builds their understanding and impression of your brand.
Mm-hmm.
Like your brand is a culmination of all of their experiences and touch points with you. And
Yeah.
that first one is really hard to reverse.
Yeah.
That first experience is really hard because then guess what? They're not going to download the lead generator and they're not going to get the emails or they're not going to book a call. Or if they do and it doesn't follow through to the emails that you write and design, like that can be an easy mismatch that
Yeah.
feels like it's a break in cohesion of
Yeah.
what they would hope their experience with you is like.
Yeah. Yeah. This is so good because, I've never really taken the time to think about, because I'm not really a web designer. I know enough to be dangerous with it. But, it's so easy where we get like, we want the website to look phenomenal. That's the number one thing that we focus on. And I deal with this challenge with emails as well. A lot of people want beautiful emails. But that doesn't help the emails actually get delivered where we want them to land. But
That's
the
right.
website is the place where you can have all of these beautiful images and colors and all of that type of stuff. But I like the fact that you've pointed out that it really has to match with the message and that call to action that we want them to take.
Yeah, and a lot of folks know this, but it bears repeating because it's this important. Social media and other platforms where it's owned by somebody else, Mark Zuckerberg or another founder or private investment group,
Yep.
is rented land, which
Hmm.
you are borrowing. It's either pay to play or you've got a free account and you're competing with the rest of the world and you have no outcome over what is said when the algorithm changes. But your website and your email list are actually two things that you can own. Your
Hmm.
email list you have even more control over than your website because you have a captive audience.
Yep.
But having a couple of places like your website, your email list that is fully owned or mostly controlled is a great complement and balance because then you get to control the message a little bit more
Yeah.
and create a better experience for your target audience.
Yeah. Now, I know one question that, some listeners probably are asking is when you're crafting your message and getting that content for the website, how do you balance with, making it a compelling message, something that's going to persuade and really speak to your target audience who's visiting your
Mhm.
website, and marry that up with SEO best practices so that you can have good rankings on Google and other search engines?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I've seen so many folks, especially people who love frameworks like StoryBrand, come and say like, "Hey, we are roofers or plumbers who will give you the best roof that you've ever had." And then like that's their whole homepage.
Hmm.
And I'm like, okay, that we got the clear part. I don't know that there's enough context for you to be indexed and found on Google,
Right.
right? You need a clear message, but you do need enough content to get really creative and make sure it's found by like automated bots and Google and AI and by the people. Like it's not an either or. You want it
Hmm.
found by both.
Sure.
And it's usually a marriage of those two. So what I love to see is a homepage, for example, that has at least 200 to 300 words on it, if possible,
Hmm.
that may not be needed by everybody. Like, for example, Elon Musk does not need a homepage with 300 words on it
Right.
because he has a personal brand and a large enough audience that like that's negligible. But if you want to be found organically,
Hmm.
shoot for at least a couple of hundred words on your homepage to get you started.
Okay.
And if you're trying to figure out how do I not overwhelm somebody, it might be having like an FAQ style section where it can collapse and expand, an
Hmm.
accordion style so that like there's clear questions that people can click on,
Yep.
but it doesn't like overwhelm them.
Yeah.
Um, and then also building with SEO in mind is not the same thing as hiring an SEO expert to like optimize every part of your site that can take a couple of months up to a couple of years.
Hmm.
I love to see small tweaks happen is have your title tag optimized to say like I am a roofer in St. Louis who does that. Like make it short, but like clearly articulate who you are, what you do.
Hmm.
Have meta description, which is that paragraph that's served up in search results or when you're on social media that says like here is who we are, here's what we do, here's what it looks like. Like a lot of those things are easily overlooked
Hmm.
because it's hard to get all of it right and forget, like, oh, I got to do that too. Or
Yeah.
alt imagery. Hardly anybody puts alt imagery
Right.
when you're solo business because you're like, oh, like that actually does help quite a bit to make sure that you're accessible. And then Google sees that
Hmm.
index, it makes for a more cohesive experience. So building with those best practices
Yeah.
uh, doesn't negate a clear message, it complements it.
Sure. Awesome. Well, I know that we're running up on our time here. So we just like really touched the surface of what people need to know about, their website and everything. And I believe you've got a resource that people can go to your website and actually get that talks about how to build a home site or a homepage for their website.
Yeah, so if you go to evancoxconsulting.com/resources, there's a couple of different free resources, and so they may be valuable, but the one that's most applicable to this conversation
Hmm.
is a free homepage template. It's a simple Google Doc that anybody can use and edit on their own, and it actually covers the different categories that you should at least consider having on your homepage. So,
Okay.
like the header with a prompt and there's an overview video at the top from me that walks through when you do this, try to do this. When you write this, try to do this. And then it allows you to actually say, oh, I'm not starting with a blank page and a dripping cursor at me. I've got a chance to actually know here's a framework that I can customize or create. And
Hmm.
then what I want to make sure it's clear for people that they can do is they can end up doing it all on their own. It's completely free.
Yeah.
Or we can actually use that template to build out that website for them. So this it's a free
Awesome.
resource that would help build it the right way and not build it backwards.
Yeah. Well, I really encourage everybody to go check that out, especially if you are considering, revamping your website, or maybe you've got a new one that you're just getting a business started and you're just like, oh, I need to have a website. Now's the perfect time. Build it correctly right out of the gate. It
Yeah.
saves you so much time and headache. So awesome. Well, any parting words before we wrap up for today, Evan?
Gosh, well, I first of all, I just appreciate you inviting and extending that invitation to be on. I hope it served your audience. And I think what we talked about early on, those very first couple of minutes,
Hmm.
is the best way to close. If you build your website backwards, you're not going to get the results that you're after, and you're ultimately not going to be able to serve your audience, which is probably why you got into business in the first place.
Yeah.
It's not that it's a whole bunch of technical like jargon that you have to get right. Like we talked about SEO, those things matter. But the
Hmm.
reality is getting your website built in the right way, in the right order, is actually an act of service that best serves your audience and grows your business at the same time.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Evan, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. Everybody, that's all for today's episode. But remember to go to evancoxconsulting.com/resources. You can grab that homepage website template, and there's a lot of other resources on that page. So scroll on down, and if there's something else, make sure that you grab that as well. The link will also be in the show notes. And if you're looking to supercharge your email marketing, check out my book, Hit the Inbox, at hittheinboxbook.com. It's packed with 76 pages of strategies to get your emails landing in inboxes and driving sales. Thanks again for tuning in today. If you found value in this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your favorite platform. It helps us reach more entrepreneurs like you. Until next time, keep crushing it in the trenches.